The kitchen was dark. The knife was cold. Adiz Okonkwo had survived Lagos traffic, a 14-hour flight, Seoul winters, and a loan that had her name written in someone else's handwriting. She had survived her mother's tears at the airport, her father's proud broken smile, her two younger sisters clinging to her dress like she was the last solid thing in a shifting world. She had survived all of it. The hunger, the homesickness, the 3 jobs she worked before this one, the professors who looked through her like she was decorative, the landlord who raised her rent the same week her scholarship was delayed. She had not survived this far to die in a billionaire mafia boss's kitchen because his wife was selling him to the highest bidder. So when the back door clicked open at 11:47 p.m. and Kang Si-won, the most feared man in South Korea, stepped into the shadow of his own kitchen, Ada did the only thing her body knew how to do. She grabbed his arm, pressed one finger to her lips, and whispered, "Don't move." Something cracked open inside him. Not fear. Not anger. Something far more dangerous. Welcome to Stories Behind the Billions, besties. I'm your host and we are just getting started. Drop your location in the comments right now. Where are you watching from? Like this video, share it with somebody who loves a story that hits different, and subscribe because what is about to happen in this kitchen will change everything. Let's go. The day Adiz Okonkwo left Nigeria, the sky was the color of a bruise. Her mother had pressed 200,000 naira into her hands at the airport, money the family did not have, scraped from the kind of places you don't ask about. Her father had held her face in both his palms and said nothing for a long time. Just looked at her like she was a prayer he was releasing into the air and hoping God was listening. Her sisters, Ngozi, 17, and little Chisholm, 11, had cried loudly and without shame, the way only children and honest people cry. Chisholm had pressed a folded piece of paper into Ada's coat pocket at the last moment, a drawing she had made the night before of the two of them holding hands under what was presumably the sun, though it looked more like an enthusiastic orange circle. Ada had not opened it until she was 30,000 feet in the air. She had not cried then either. She was 27 years old. She had a postgraduate acceptance letter from the University of Seoul, a scholarship that covered 60% of her fees, a loan that covered the rest and then some, and a family of 4 waiting back home for the money she would send every single month without fail. Crying was a luxury she had already returned to sender. Seoul was beautiful and indifferent the way all great cities are. It did not care that she was exhausted. It did not care that her Korean was functional at best and embarrassing at worst. It moved around her in waves of neon and purpose, and she stood in the middle of it like a woman deciding whether to swim or drown. She chose to swim. She always chose to swim. Her course mate Oh Soren had been waiting outside the arrivals gate with a handwritten sign that said Ada Okonkwo, "Welcome to Chaos" in both English and Yoruba, phonetically misspelled in the most endearing way possible. Ada had laughed for the first time in 14 hours. Soren was small, loud, perpetually caffeinated, and the kind of Korean woman who had watched enough Nollywood that she greeted Ada's mother on video call in broken Igbo without a single moment of self-consciousness. Ada had loved her immediately. It was Soren who found her the job 3 months later when the scholarship payment was delayed, the landlord stopped accepting promises, and Ada's father was hospitalized for a week with something the doctors called stress-related but that Ada knew was called poverty with a medical name. "It's a private household," Soren had said, sliding a card across the library table. "Chef position. Live-in optional. The pay is..." She had paused, bitten her lip. "Very good. Like very, very good, Ada." Ada had looked at the card. A phone number. An address in Songbuk-dong. No company name. "Whose house?" she had asked. Soren had smiled in a way that meant she was about to be selectively honest. "Someone important. But the kitchen is incredible, I promise." Ada had taken the card. She had needed the money more than she needed the details. The house was not a house. It was a statement. Perched at the top of a private road in Songbuk-dong, the compound sat behind black iron gates and 2 security personnel who checked Ada's ID with the kind of thoroughness usually reserved for international borders. The building itself was modern and severe, all dark stone and glass, the kind of architecture that was designed to make visitors feel small before they even reached the door. Ada straightened her spine and walked in like she owned the place. The head housekeeper, a thin, precise woman named Mrs. Huang, met her at the entrance and walked her through the rules with the energy of someone reciting terms and conditions they fully expected to be violated. No personal phone calls in the main living areas. Meals at the time specified. The child's meals prepared separately with no spice above mild. The master's breakfast at 6:30 sharp. No exceptions. "And madam?" Ada had asked, looking around at the immaculate interior, the kind of clean that felt more like erasure than tidiness. Mrs. Huang had paused for just a fraction of a second. "Madam has her own schedule." Ada filed that away. She met Park Sarah 20 minutes later. Sarah was the kind of beautiful that felt deliberately weaponized, tall, flawlessly put together, wearing the sort of casual outfit that cost more than Ada's monthly rent in Lagos. She had looked at Ada the way people look at new furniture. Assessing utility. Noting placement. Moving on. "You're the chef," she said. "Not a question." "Yes, madam. My husband has specific taste. Mrs. Huang will brief you. Don't overcomplicate things." She turned to leave, then stopped. Her eyes moved to the small container of ground crayfish Ada had placed on the counter, a personal supply she had carried from a Nigerian grocery store 40 minutes across the city because it made her pepper soup taste like home. Sarah picked it up, examined it the way a person examines something they have already decided is beneath them. "What is this?" "A personal spice, madam. It won't be used in the household meals, it's mine." Sarah set it down without replacing it where it had been. A small displacement. Deliberate. "Keep your personal items out of my kitchen," she said. "Of course, madam." "And open a window. It smells." She left, heels clicking across marble like punctuation. Ada stood at the counter for exactly 3 seconds. Then she picked up the container, placed it back exactly where it had been, and did not open the window. It was a small act of quiet resistance. It was the first. Then something small crashed into her legs from behind. She looked down. Kang Junhee, 4 years old, round-cheeked, wearing dinosaur socks on the wrong feet, stared up at her with enormous dark eyes and said in very serious Korean, "You smell like food." Ada crouched to his level. "That is the best thing anyone has ever said to me." Junhee considered this. Then grabbed her hand and began pulling her toward the kitchen like he had been waiting for her specifically. In the cold architecture of that house, he was the only warm thing. Ada told herself not to get attached. She got attached immediately. She did not meet Kang Si-won that first day. She met his absence instead, the empty chair at the head of the dining table, the untouched breakfast she had prepared at 6:30 sharp, the housekeeper's carefully neutral expression when Ada asked where the master of the house was. "He will eat when he returns," Mrs. Huang said. "Keep it warm." He returned at 9:17 p.m. Ada knew because the entire energy of the house shifted. Staff who had been moving at a normal human pace suddenly found reasons to be elsewhere or to stand straighter. Even the air seemed to reorganize itself. She was in the kitchen plating the reheated meal when she felt it. Not heard, felt. The particular pressure of being watched by someone who has not yet decided what they are looking at. She turned her head slightly without turning her body. He was standing in the kitchen doorway. Kang Si-won was not what she had constructed in her mind from the compound's architecture and the staff's careful deference and the cold geometry of the house. She had expected something harder. Something that announced itself. He was tall and still in a dark suit, travel-worn at the edges, with the kind of face that had been lived in rather than merely worn, sharp jaw, heavy brow, eyes that were doing something specific and unreadable as they moved from the plate in her hands to her face and stayed there 1 second longer than a man simply identifying his new employee needed to stay. Ada looked back at the plate and continued plating. "You're the new chef," he said. His English was clean and precise, with the particular cadence of someone who learned it as a tool rather than a language. "Yes, sir." "What is that?" "Doenjang jjigae." Mrs. Huang left the recipe but I adjusted the seasoning slightly. "If that's a problem I can." "Bring it to the study." He was gone before she could respond. She brought it to the study. 40 minutes later she came to collect the tray and the bowl was empty. Completely. The kind of empty that means a person ate not because they were being polite but because the food demanded to be finished. He did not compliment her. He did not need to. Ada walked back to the kitchen with the empty bowl and felt something she had not felt since she landed in Seoul. Like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She told herself it was just professional satisfaction. She was already wrong about that. It happened on a Tuesday. 11 days into the job. Long enough for Ada to know the rhythms of the house. Who woke when, which doors creaked, what time the security rotation changed at the back gate. She had learned these things the way any woman living alone in a stranger's house learns them. Quietly. Carefully. For her own peace of mind. Si-won was supposed to be in Busan. A 2-day trip. Mrs. Huang had confirmed it that morning. Ada was in the kitchen at 11:40 p.m., prepping the next day's breakfast, because she had learned that 6:30 sharp meant 5:50 for her or the timing fell apart. She worked in near darkness, just the low light above the counter, moving efficiently, her mind split between the task in front of her and the voice note she needed to send her mother before the Lagos morning got too busy. That was when she heard Sarah. Not loudly. The woman was too careful for loud. She was in the connecting living room, the one that shared a wall with the kitchen, and her voice was low and deliberate and utterly certain she was alone in the house. Ada's hands stilled. The February accounts are already redirected. You won't find it for another 3 weeks if we move carefully, yes. All of it. The Incheon holdings too. Ada did not breathe. Do-hyun, stop worrying. By the time he understands what happened, there will be nothing left to recover. The back door clicked. Ada spun. Kang Si-won stepped through the kitchen entrance in a dark coat, travel bag over one shoulder, the particular stillness of a man who had cut the Busan trip short for reasons he had not shared with anyone. He saw her. She saw him. Sarah's voice continued from the next room, quiet, damning, unaware. Ada moved before she thought. 3 steps across the kitchen floor, her hand closing around Si-won's forearm, solid, immovable, like grabbing the arm of a building, and she pulled him away from the doorway and pressed herself close enough that she could feel the cold still radiating off his coat. Her eyes found his in the dark. Her voice was barely sound. Don't move. She's still on the phone. If she hears you right now, you will lose everything before you understand what you're losing. The kitchen was silent except for Sarah's muffled voice and the sound of Ada's heartbeat, which was frankly unreasonably loud for the situation. Si-won did not move. He looked down at her, this woman with flour on her wrist and fire in her eyes, standing close enough that he could see every anxious calculation running across her face, and something inside him shifted on its axis. Not fear. Not strategy. Something older than both. He listened. Sarah's voice carried clearly through the wall. Account numbers. Do-hyun's name again. A date in March. The words, "He trusts me completely," delivered with the flat effect of someone reporting weather. When the call ended and Sarah's heels clicked toward the stairs, Si-won still had not moved. Ada slowly released his arm. She stepped back. Her face had gone carefully neutral, the particular expression of a woman who has just realized she touched a dangerous man without permission and is now performing calm with everything she has. I apologize for. How long have you known? His voice was so controlled it frightened her more than anger would have. Tonight, she said. Only tonight. He looked at her for a long moment. Something unreadable moved behind his eyes. Then he straightened his coat, picked up his bag and walked toward the stairs. At the doorway he stopped. He did not turn around. Finish the prep, he said quietly, and locked the kitchen door. Ada stood alone in the dark kitchen for a long time after he left. Her hand, the one that had grabbed his arm, was still warm. The next morning Si-won came down at 6:28. Ada had his breakfast ready at 6:25. She stood at the counter with her back straight and her expression professional and her hands completely steady, which she considered a personal achievement given the events of 11 hours ago. He sat. He ate. He did not look at her. She was clearing the juice glass when he spoke. You will not discuss what you heard. Not with the staff. Not with your friend who got you this job. Not with anyone. I understand. You will continue your duties as normal. Yes, sir. Pause. Your contract, he said, is extended indefinitely. With a salary adjustment. Ada set down the glass carefully. I don't need a salary adjustment. I didn't ask what you need. The air between them was the particular texture of 2 people who had stood very close in the dark and were now pretending they had not. Ada picked up the glass again and walked to the sink. Sir, she said with her back to him, I'm not staying because of the money. The silence that followed lasted exactly 4 seconds. I know, he said. She heard the chair move. His footsteps toward the doorway. And then a pause. Brief and deliberate. She did not turn around but she heard it, the soft sound of something being set down on the counter beside the door. When she finally turned after he had gone, she found her market list from yesterday, which had been sitting in a crumpled ball near the fruit bowl, smooth, flat and held down with the salt shaker. He had straightened it. Such a small thing. Ada stared at it for a long moment. Then she picked it up, folded it carefully and put it in her apron pocket. The house was quiet at 6 a.m. but it was not a peaceful quiet. It was the kind of quiet that happens when something inevitable is finally arriving and every wall and floorboard and carefully arranged object in a room knows it before the people do. Ada heard it begin from the kitchen. Not the words, the walls were too thick for that. But the register of it. 2 voices. One measured and low, the kind of low that is more dangerous than loud. One higher, clipped, increasingly stripped of its usual armor. She kept her hands moving. Timer. Knife on the board. It was not her business. Junhee was still asleep upstairs. She told herself both of those things twice. Down the hall in the study the door was closed. Si-won stood at the window with his back to the room and his hands in his pockets. He had not sat down. He had not raised his voice. He had simply called Sarah in at 5:50 a.m. and placed his phone on the desk between them. The recording app open, the timestamp showing Tuesday night, the audio unmistakable. He let it play for 40 seconds. Then he stopped it. I want to hear you say it wasn't you, he said, still facing the window. I want to give you that opportunity. Sarah stood in the center of the room in a silk robe, her composure intact in the way that composure is intact when it has been constructed rather than earned. She looked at the phone. She looked at his back. She said nothing. Dohayan, C1 said. The name like something he was setting down carefully before it cut him. Of all the choices available to you. C1. How long? Not a question. A blade laid flat on a table. Sarah's chin lifted. 2 years. The window held his reflection. Face unreadable, jaw set, eyes doing something that he did not allow the rest of his body to participate in. The Incheon accounts, he said, are already moved. Yes. The February transfers. Yes. The Busan contact. Pause. Yes. He turned around. Ada, from the kitchen through the walls, heard nothing for a long moment. That particular silence was somehow louder than everything before it. I want you out, he said. Today. Before Junhee wakes up. Something finally moved across Sarah's face. Not remorse, something more complicated and more cold. You can't take my son. I'm not taking him, C1 said. You're leaving him. There is a difference and you already know it. I'll fight you. With what? His voice did not rise. It simply became more precise. With the accounts that are now frozen? With Dohayan, whose operation I will dismantle before the end of the month? With the lawyers you were planning to pay with money that no longer exists in the places you put it? Sarah stared at him. I gave you everything, he said. Very quiet. I want you to understand that I know that. I gave you everything and you chose to burn it. That is your right. But you do not get to burn Junhee on your way out. I love my son. Then act like it, he said. For the next 20 minutes. Walk out of this house like a woman who loves her son. Don't make him watch something he will spend 20 years trying to forget. Give him that much. The silence that followed was long and total. Sarah looked at him, this man she had calculated and underestimated and ultimately failed to destroy, and for one unguarded second something genuine moved across her face. Something that might have been grief or might have been the recognition of a road not taken, or might have simply been the shock of losing. Then it was gone. She straightened her robe. Have Mrs. Huang send my things, she said, and she walked out of the study. Ada heard the heels in the hallway. She heard them pause. She looked up from the counter and through the kitchen doorway saw Sarah standing at the foot of the stairs, perfect posture, immaculate even now, one hand resting briefly on the newel post as though steadying herself. Then the hand lifted, and Sarah walked to the front door and did not look up the stairs. Ada heard the small sound from the landing before she saw him. Kang Junhee, 4 years old, dinosaur socks, standing at the top of the stairs with his hair still pressed flat from sleep, holding the railing with both hands and looking down at his mother's back with the enormous serious eyes of a child who understands more than anyone has told him. Yama, he said. Sarah stopped. Her hand was on the door. She did not turn around fully. Just her chin toward her shoulder. The profile of a woman making a choice she had already made. Be a good boy, she said. The door opened. The door closed. The click of it was the smallest sound in the world. Junhee stood at the top of the stairs for a long moment. Then he came down, one step at a time, both feet on each step the way small children descend stairs, and walked through the hallway in his dinosaur socks and came into the kitchen and climbed onto his chair. Ada could not speak. She sat down beside him. He picked up a dried bean from the pile they had been counting the day before. He placed it on the table. One, he said in English, very carefully, like he was holding something fragile in his voice and was determined not to drop it. Ada's eyes burned. That's right, baby, she managed. One. She did not know that C1 had come to stand at the kitchen doorway behind her. She did not know how long he stood there, watching his son count beans with the Nigerian chef who had flour on her sleeve and tears she was refusing to shed, or what that image did to the carefully managed architecture of everything inside him. She did not know that he stood there until Junhee reached 10 and looked up at Ada with something fragile and proud on his small face. She did not know that by the time she turned around, C1 was already gone. But she felt it, the way you feel when someone has been standing close and has left, and the air holds the shape of them for just a moment before it closes. Ada looked at the empty doorway. She looked at Junhee. She took a quiet breath and picked up a bean. Again, she said softly. From 1. 3 weeks later. Lee Do-hyun arrived on a Thursday evening in a gray suit that probably cost more than a mid-range vehicle, with a smile that belonged on someone who had never once had to raise his voice to get what he wanted. He was 38. Elegantly constructed. The kind of dangerous that introduces itself as charming and only reveals the other thing when it is far too late. C1 received him in the formal dining room. A business dinner, or something shaped like one. Ada had been briefed to prepare a 6-course meal and to remain available for the duration of service. She served the first course without looking up. Extraordinary, Do-hyun said, and Ada assumed he meant the food until she realized his eyes were not on the plate. She kept her expression neutral and withdrew. The second time she came to clear, Do-hyun spoke to her directly. "Where are you from?" he asked. Korean but unhurried. Conversational. As though C1 were not sitting 4 feet away. "Nigeria, sir." "Which part?" "Enugu." Do-hyun smiled. And then he said in Yoruba, clean, practiced, deliberate, "You are very far from home. I hope someone here is taking care of you." The table went very quiet. Ada's eyes moved to his face involuntarily. The Yoruba was not perfect, but it was not accidental. Nothing about this man was accidental. Across the table, C1's hand, which had been resting loosely beside his glass, stilled completely. Not a flinch. Not a shift. A stillness so total and so sudden it was louder than movement. His eyes moved from Do-hyun's face to Ada's and back again with a slowness that was not casual, and when they settled back on Do-hyun they carried something in them that had not been there 30 seconds ago. Something territorial. Something that had not yet decided whether to be quiet about itself. "I take care of myself," Ada replied in Korean and picked up the plate. She did not look at C1 as she walked back to the kitchen. She did not need to. She could feel it. The particular quality of his silence which had shifted from controlled to something with sharp edges underneath. She could feel it across the room, through the wall, across the entire ground floor of that house. Later, after Do-hyun left and the staff had cleared and the house had settled, Ada was wiping down the kitchen counter when she heard footsteps. C1 appeared in the doorway. He leaned against the frame with his hands in his pockets and looked at her for a long moment. "He researched you," C1 said. "I know. That means he considers you relevant. I'm a chef. In my house. Pause. Which makes you relevant whether you want to be or not." Ada set down the cloth. "Are you warning me or threatening me?" Something flickered in his eyes. Not quite amusement. Not quite not. "I'm informing you," he said. "There is a difference." He pushed off the door frame and left. Ada stood in the kitchen for a long moment, her heart doing something complicated and entirely unprofessional in her chest. Besties, if this story already has your heart working overtime, drop a like right now. And tell me in the comments, what did he do that got you? Was it the kitchen? Was it the way he watched her? Was it the Yoruba? We are watching from everywhere tonight. Drop your location below. Let's keep going. That same night. 2:04 a.m. Ada sat on the kitchen counter with her knees pulled up and her phone pressed to her ear, listening to it ring twice before her mother picked up with the specific alertness of a woman who has never fully slept since her firstborn left the country. "Ada, you're calling late." "I know, Mama. I just wanted to hear your voice." Pause. Then softer, "Are you eating?" "I am a chef, Mama." "That is not what I asked." Ada smiled in the dark. "Yes, I'm eating." Her mother told her about Chisholm's school play. She was playing a tree apparently with enormous commitment and a costume that had required 3 yards of green fabric and a disagreement with the art teacher, and Ngozi's new part-time job and her father's blood pressure check which had come back better than last month. Small things. The sacred ordinary mathematics of a family staying alive. Ada listened with her whole body. "The loan payment this month," her mother began. "Already sent." "Ada? It's already sent, Mama. Don't worry." Another pause. The kind that carried weight. "You are too far," her mother said quietly. "You are too far and you carry too much." "It's not too much." Adiz. "It's not too much," she repeated. Firm. Final. "I'm okay. I promise." She stayed on the call for 20 more minutes, mostly just listening. Her mother humming briefly while doing something in the kitchen on that end. Her father's voice calling out a question from another room. The ordinary sound of home. When she hung up, the kitchen felt enormous. She sat in the silence for a while, not moving, her phone dark in her hands, her face doing things she would not have allowed it to do in front of another person. She did not know that Kang Si-won had come downstairs for water at 2 a.m. and had stood in the hallway outside the kitchen doorway for 11 minutes. She did not know that he had heard everything. Chisholm's tree costume, the loan payment, her mother's worry, the particular sound of her voice when she said it's not too much in a tone that meant it was everything. She did not know the expression on his face as he stood there, or how long he remained after she hung up, looking at her through the doorway as she sat alone in the dark kitchen, composed and exhausted and entirely heartbreakingly human. He went back upstairs without the water. He did not sleep. 4 days later. Ada was taking the back route from the market, a habit she had built because it saved 12 minutes and she valued 12 minutes the way other people valued vacations, when the man stepped out of the side street. He was not subtle about it. He said something in Korean that Ada's language skills were unfortunately good enough to understand. Something about a message. Something about people who keep their eyes open needing to learn to keep their mouths shut. Ada shifted her grocery bag to her left hand. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said in Korean. "Steady." He stepped closer. She broke his nose with the heel of her right palm, dropped her elbow into his sternum as he doubled forward, and stepped cleanly around him while he processed the situation from the ground. She picked up her grocery bag from where it had fallen, checked that the eggs were unbroken, 2 had cracked, which genuinely annoyed her more than the man did, and walked away at a normal pace. She made it half a block before she stopped. She stood at the edge of the pavement with her grocery bag in both hands and breathed. 1 breath. 2. The kind of deliberate breathing that is not about calm but about reclaiming the body's rhythm after it has done something on pure instinct. Her hands were not shaking. She checked them specifically to make sure. They were not shaking. Good, she told herself. Good. The eggs. Focus on the eggs. She looked in the bag. 2 cracked. 4 intact. She could work with 4. She walked the rest of the way home at a normal pace, reorganized her face into something unremarkable before she reached the gate and told no one. She found out that C1 knew anyway at 10 p.m. that night when she was cleaning the kitchen and he appeared in the doorway and said, without preamble, "Sit down. I'm working." Adiz. It was the first time he had used her full name. The way he said it, not a command, not precisely but something quieter and more serious, made her sit down. He sat across from her at the kitchen island. Between them, the low overhead light. The quiet house. The specific intimacy of a kitchen at night. "It was one of Do-hyun's men," he said. "I assumed. You should have called me. I handled it." "That is not." He stopped. Something moved through his expression, frustration, and underneath it something rawer that he locked away quickly. "You shouldn't have been in a position to handle it." Ada looked at him directly. "Then do better at keeping them away from me." A silence. "I will," he said. Very quiet. Very certain. Ada looked at his face, the controlled jaw, the careful eyes, the particular quality of his stillness which she had slowly learned to read, and felt the wall she had been maintaining with both hands develop a crack that ran from top to bottom. "Why do you care?" she asked. Genuinely. Not challenging. Just asking. The question sat between them. He did not answer it. But he did not look away. And somehow that was more of an answer than words would have been. A week later. Early morning. Ada's phone lit up at 6:03 a.m. A bank notification. She assumed it was her scheduled transfer to Lagos and picked it up without urgency. She read it 3 times. Then she sat up in bed and read it again. The loan, the full outstanding balance, every one of the debt that had been sitting on her family's chest since before she boarded the plane, was cleared. Paid in full. Overnight. The reference name on the transaction was a holding company she did not recognize. She recognized the holding company 15 minutes of research later. It belonged to Kong Si-won. Ada got dressed with the particular efficiency of a woman who has converted shock into fuel, walked downstairs, found Si-won at the dining table with his morning coffee and a tablet of documents, and placed her phone face up on the table in front of him. He looked at it. Then at her. "You had no right," she said. Controlled. Careful. "I did not ask you for that." "No," he agreed. "You didn't." "Then why?" He was quiet for a moment. He set down his coffee. He looked at her with the full weight of his attention, that particular quality he had of making a person feel like the only object in a very large room. "Because you call your mother at 2 a.m. and lie to her about being okay," he said. "Because you send money home every month before you buy anything for yourself. Because you walked into a job in a dangerous house and handled everything thrown at you with more grace than most people I employ with 20 years of experience." Pause. "And because the loan should not exist. It was not yours to carry alone." Ada stood very still. Her throat had done something inconvenient. "I was going to pay it myself," she said, but her voice had lost its hard edge somewhere in the middle of his speech and they both knew it. "I know," he said. "You would have. That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" He stood up. He was taller than she always forgot he was, close like this, with the morning light coming through the windows and the house still quiet and Junhee not yet awake. He was simply, undeniably present in the way that some people are present like a force of nature and you can only decide whether to stand in it or step back. Ada did not step back. "The point," he said quietly, "is that you should not have to carry it. Not here. Not in my house. Not," he stopped. Something shifted in his expression. Raw and brief and quickly contained. Not while I can do something about it. The kitchen was very quiet. Ada looked at him, this complicated, powerful, privately devastated man who had paid off her family's debt at midnight without asking for a single thing in return, and felt the last brick in the wall between them come loose and fall without a sound. Something moved through her chest then, not gratitude, not precisely, though that was part of it. Something warmer and more frightening. The specific feeling of being truly seen by someone you had been trying very hard not to see back. Her heart was not behaving professionally. She was aware of this. She was also aware of the precise distance between them, close enough that she could see the slight irregularity in his breathing, close enough that the morning light caught the exact place where his careful composure was doing its very best work and barely winning. C1, she said. The name without the title. For the first time. He stilled. She did not know what she meant to say next. She was not certain there were words for it. This thing that had been building in the dark kitchen, in the late-night silences, in the space between don't move and every moment that came after. She took one step toward him. He did not move. But his eyes did, dropped briefly, returned, with the particular quality of a man exercising enormous restraint over something that was becoming very difficult to restrain. Ada, he said. Her name in his voice like something he had been holding carefully for a long time. She was close enough now that she could see the exact moment his control began to fracture. She lifted her hand and placed it flat against his chest, over his heartbeat, which was not, she discovered, as steady as the rest of him pretended to be. He covered her hand with his. The kitchen held its breath. Neither of them spoke. The morning light stretched long and quiet across the kitchen floor. Outside, Seoul was beginning its day with its customary indifference. Traffic, birdsong, the distant sound of a vendor 2 streets over. Inside, the world had narrowed to the size of 2 people standing in a kitchen with their hands over each other's heartbeats. C1 looked at her for a long moment, the kind of looking that is not observation but something more deliberate. Something that has made a decision. He reached up slowly and tucked a loose curl behind her ear. His fingers barely grazed her cheek. Ada's breath caught. She felt it move through her from that single point of contact. Warm and quiet and devastating in the way that gentle things are sometimes more devastating than forceful ones. Her eyes lifted to his. He was watching her with an expression she had never seen on him in all the weeks of mornings and late nights and kitchen silences. Open, unguarded, stripped of the careful distance he kept between himself and everything he could not afford to lose. I don't know what this is, she said. Honest. Barely audible. I know exactly what it is, he said. He lowered his head slowly, giving her every opportunity to step back, to choose differently, to rebuild the wall if she needed it. She did not step back. The rest is the particular private language of 2 people who have been circling something inevitable and have finally, quietly, chosen to stop running from it. The kitchen light held them. The world continued entirely without them. Fade to black. The following morning, Ada woke to sunlight and the sound of Junhee singing something tuneless in the hallway. She lay still for a moment in the particular warmth of a morning that feels different from all the mornings before it. Lighter somehow, rearranged like the world has quietly shifted 2 degrees while you were sleeping and the new angle catches the light differently. She made herself presentable and went downstairs. The kitchen was empty. She began breakfast. Normal. Steady. The same hands, the same counter, the same 6:30 schedule, except that nothing was the same and they both knew it and somehow that knowledge sat warmly instead of dangerously. C1 came down at 6:28. Their eyes met across the kitchen. He said nothing. She said nothing. But the corner of his mouth moved in a way that she filed away carefully and completely. Junhee ran in and demanded pancakes shaped like dinosaurs and the moment dissolved into the beautiful ordinary business of a morning. By 8 o'clock C1 was in his study. Ada was prepping lunch. Junhee was with his tutor. The house moved through its rhythms like any other day. At 8:17 C1's phone rang. At 8:19, every security guard on the property received a simultaneous alert. At 8:21 Mrs. Huang came to the kitchen doorway with a face Ada had never seen on her before, stripped of its careful professionalism, replaced with something unguarded and afraid. Miss Ada, she said. When did you go outside this morning? Ada turned. I haven't. I've been in here since 6. Why? Mrs. Huang opened her mouth. C1 appeared behind her in the doorway. He had his phone in his hand. His face was a mask, but it was the kind of mask that goes on over something catastrophic, and Ada had learned to read the difference. He looked at her for one long moment. Then he turned the phone around. The screen showed a photograph. A Soren. Sitting in a chair Ada did not recognize, in a room Ada did not recognize, with her wrists bound and her eyes terrified and a single white card in her lap that read, in clean printed Korean, You have 24 hours to make a choice, Kang Si-won. The Nigerian girl. Or everything else. Ada stared at the photograph. Her mind moved through it in slow, terrible clarity. Soren, who had held the arrival sign in the wrong language. Soren, who had found her the job. Soren, who had called her last night just to ask if she had eaten and laughed for 10 minutes about something ridiculous and said, "I love you, Uni," before hanging up the way she always did, careless and warm and completely unaware. Ada's hand was shaking. She pressed it flat on the counter. She looked up at Si-won. His jaw was a blade. His eyes were something she had never seen in them before, not cold, not controlled. Fury. Absolute. Personal. The kind that does not announce itself. Besties. Take a breath. Drop "I felt that" in the comments right now if you cannot believe what just happened to Soren. Share this story with someone who needs something this powerful tonight. And stay with us, because Dohyun is not finished. What comes next changes everything. Scroll down, Si-won said. Very quiet. Ada looked at him. His expression told her before the image did. She took the phone with a hand that was steady through sheer will and scrolled. The second photograph loaded slowly. It was not Seoul. It was a street she recognized. The particular slant of afternoon light, the compound wall, the flame tree at the corner that had been there since she was 7 years old. Her family street. Lagos. Her father was visible at the gate. Her mother beside him. Chisholm's green school bag on her back. They did not know they were being photographed. They did not know what they were standing inside of. Below the image, the text read, "I know where everyone she loves lives, Si-won. Seoul is just where I started." The phone screen blurred. Ada realized distantly that her eyes had filled, not with fear, not exactly, but with something that sits just below fear and is in some ways worse. The cold, clear understanding that the people you love most in the world are standing in a danger they cannot see, in a city you cannot reach in time, because of a life you chose and a man you let past your walls and a war that was never supposed to have your name in it. She looked up at Si-won. He was already watching her. And underneath the fury in his eyes, something else. Something that looked, unmistakably, like a man who has just understood exactly how much he has to lose. Si-won, Ada said. Her voice barely held. He was already moving, phone to his ear, words in Korean too fast and too hard for her to follow, and the house around them had transformed in the space of 3 minutes from pancakes and morning light into something that had teeth and knew how to use them. Ada stood in the kitchen with the phone still in her hand and the image of her mother's compound wall still on the screen and Junhee's tuneless singing still drifting from somewhere upstairs, innocent and ordinary and completely unknowing. The last thing she heard before the world fully shifted was Si-won's voice, low and certain and final as a door closing on everything that came before it. Find her. Lock down Lagos. And burn everything else down if you have to. But no one touches what is mine. The photograph was still on the screen. Ada's best friend was gone. Her family was in the crosshairs of a war they didn't know existed. And the man she had only just let past every wall she owned was already dismantling the world to protect all of them. Some fires once started do not wait for permission. And Kang Si-won had never in his life waited for anything. End of part 1.